Microsoft Surface for Windows RT. I've been spending about a week with it, as has Tim Stevens, our editor-in-chief, and I'm really excited to give you a first look. This is really the first time we've been able to do any sort of in-depth hands-on since this was announced back in June. So what you're looking at here is a 10.6-inch screen here, and Microsoft says that it is the ideal size because what it allows you to do is really go into multitasking mode in this new version of Windows here, so that you have one app taking up 1/3 of the screen, the other taking up 2/3 of the screen, and it still doesn't feel too cramped. And Microsoft was worried that if it went with a more traditional 10.1-inch panel, it would have a really cramped experience once you started getting into multitasking like this. At the same time, Microsoft was worried that if it went with a larger 11-inch screen, the whole thing would be a little bit too unwieldy. And it definitely does seem like a good compromise. In terms of build quality, this is really top-notch. This is one of the most precious things I've held in recent weeks or months, I think. This is made out of magnesium here, and it's made using Microsoft's VaporMag manufacturing process, which in layman's terms pushes out the air to make it as thin as possible. But I couldn't really tell you about the design here without going back to that kickstand that I showed you earlier. So there's one way to open it. There's one single notch on the side here, which makes it a little bit awkward to open sometimes. But the good news is that this is a really sturdy hinge. You are not going to break this thing, at least not easily. There are 3 hinges all told. There's one on each side. There's also one tucked in the middle here, and they control the feel of the device so that it feels just really strong, really sturdy. So we've gone over what a great build quality this is. I'm just going to, while I'm here, give you a quick tour of the ports on the device here. You'll see that there is a speaker there, the video output. This is a full-size USB port, so obviously one of the reasons it's not the thinnest tablet, but a lot of people would say this is a really good trade-off, especially because you are dealing with Windows, and Windows RT does have a desktop allowing you to get to that traditional file manager, so that's a really useful thing to have on this particular platform. Moving it around here, these are of course the the docking connectors that you use to get into those keyboards that I'm going to swing back and show you in just a minute. Being a tablet, you'll have volume rocker here, headphone jack there, another speaker, and not much to show you here except for the power button. So I'm going to flip back to the side that we've covered. In here is a micro SD slot, so you would have to open the kickstand to find it. It's completely hidden otherwise, and it's not just micro SD, it's micro SDXC, so it can support 64 gigabyte cards if you want. And of course, it's hidden once you snap that shut. Now that I'm back here, we've already seen why this is an ideal screen size, but let's just talk a little bit about the technology powering it. This is a 1366 by 768 panel. And it's on par with any IPS display you've ever seen. This uses Microsoft's ClearType subpixel rendering technology, and because it's an optically bonded display, meaning because the touchscreen is bonded to the LCD into a single layer, there are fewer opportunities for incoming light to refract. So basically it means that this is a pretty minimally reflective display. I had the chance to see this side by side at Microsoft's own studios. Microsoft gave us a side-by-side comparison with the new iPad, and this indeed was the less reflective display. So now that we've gone over the tablet itself, let's talk about how it works once you add the keyboard covers into the mix. I'm going to start with the keyboard cover that got the most attention, and before I do that, you'll just see here that this is connected through magnets, and there are both alignment connectors and ones that help it keep it really firmly in place. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo here of what it's like to type on this keyboard. I'm just going to type lots of random nonsense. You'll see here that when I'm typing, as my confidence builds, I type faster and faster. My fingers actually, if I really trust the keyboard, find these keys pretty easily. The letter keys are all big enough for my fingers, and I think they'll be big enough for most people's. And the space bar is really easy to hit. Microsoft actually widened the space bar as it was working on this in its research and development phase. There were people with really big hands whose thumbs kept reaching back and hitting the trackpad here. So over time, Microsoft made sure that the spacebar was nice and thick. And definitely it's very easy to hit. Same for the backspace key if you do happen to make a mistake. But we also have the Type keyboard cover. So as you can see, it's for people who want a more traditional typing experience. This is definitely a usable keyboard. In some ways I prefer the flat touch cover keyboard because in this case there's no separation between the keys, so they're pushed very close together, and I find actually I'm more likely to hit the right key on the flat touch keyboard than I am on this more traditional one, which I thought was really interesting. I imagine this might be the keyboard where I felt more at home, but actually it's the funky looking keyboard that some of you might have been a little bit wary of or skeptical of when you first saw it. And as you can see here, it's easy to pull the keyboard off of these covers. It was by design that they lock in a really firm, solid, reassuring way, but at the same time, you don't really have to wrench them out so forcefully. At the same time, it's durable, and I know this might make you nervous, but I can dangle the tablet like this, and it won't be any worse for the wear. This, of course, is running Windows RT, and this is actually the first RT-based system that we've gotten to test. And of course it has many of the trappings of full Windows 8, and that it does have this modern UI with all these live tiles, and the same modern, the same apps that you would get in the Windows Store for the modern UI that you would get on a full Windows 8 machine, you can also get here. Part of RT, though, is that there is a desktop. So I think that's one misconception about Windows RT, the idea that there is no desktop. There is, it's just that you can't install any old programs on it. For instance, this is what happens if I try to run a program that was really meant for full Windows machines. It'll just tell you, it says this app can't run on your PC. So before we wrap it up here, a little bit about the performance. Obviously, because this runs Windows RT, that means inherently that this has an ARM-based chip inside. Specifically, it's an NVIDIA Tegra processor, and it's paired with 2 gigs of RAM, and that is more than enough to handle the overhead of these, the modern UI here and these live tiles. Very responsive here, very easy to open an app, but then change my mind by going to the Start menu. Very easy to swipe through apps here. I am creating a little bit of a lag, so it's not that it has no limitations, but for the most part it's pretty smooth and responsive. A little bit about pricing. This begins at $499, and that's for the tablet only with 32 gigabytes of solid-state storage. You can get the 32 gigabyte version with this touch cover here, and that will cost $599. And you can also buy a bundle with the keyboard cover and, instead of a 32 gigabyte tablet, a 64 gigabyte tablet, and that'll cost you $699. So these are already up for pre-order, but they're not going to ship and they're not going to show up in Microsoft retail stores until October 26th. Either way, you're going to have to go through Microsoft to buy this, either in person or